Padre Pio often said that the greatest spiritual danger is not rebellion against God, nor the weight of scandalous sin. It is something far quieter, more polite, more invisible even to the one suffering from it false security. He warned his spiritual children that many souls walk confidently toward eternity, believing themselves already safe, already righteous, already holy, even while their hearts drift farther and farther from the God they claim to serve. Pride may blind the sinner, he said, but complacency numbs the saint, and nothing is harder to awaken than a soul that believes itself awake. Among the countless visions and encounters Padre Pio experienced in prayer, there was one he rarely spoke of openly. The friars who lived with him preserved it with great care, because of the extraordinary sorrow that remained on his face long after the vision ended. They said it was the only time they saw Padre Pio look as though a weight from heaven itself had settled over his shoulders. It was late evening when the vision came to him. The chapel at San Giovanni Rotondo was almost entirely dark, lit only by 2 thin candles on the altar, whose flames trembled like living things in search of breath. Padre Pio had been kneeling before the tabernacle for hours, absorbed in meditation. The cold stone beneath him pressed sharply against his knees, but he did not notice. Prayer had drawn him beyond the senses. Then, without warning, he felt the unmistakable presence of another being. Not an angel, he knew their warmth. Not a suffering soul from purgatory, he knew their trembling. This presence was different, still, composed, strangely self-assured. Padre Pio opened his eyes. Standing only a few feet away was the figure of a man dressed in elegant clothing that suggested reputation, respectability, perhaps even religious influence. He carried himself not with fear or humility, but with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to approval. The man smiled faintly, as if expecting recognition. Padre Pio sensed immediately that something was deeply wrong. The soul did not radiate peace as the blessed do, nor did it bear the restless agony of those undergoing purification. Instead, it stood in an eerie stiffness, a posture that felt unnatural, not the rigidity of fear, but the rigidity of certainty. He appeared, Padre Pio later said, like a man who believes nothing is wrong. The man greeted him with courtesy, but beneath it lay something harder, colder, a quiet pride. His voice had the tone of someone presenting his credentials at a gate he felt entitled to pass through. "I was a good man," the soul said, "a moral man. I attended Mass, supported the church, gave generously to the poor. People respected me. I lived rightly." Padre Pio listened without interruption. A heavy weight gathered inside him, a sorrow he could not yet name. The man continued listing his virtues, his discipline, his religious habits, his kindness, his civic reputation. But as the words left the soul, Padre Pio began to perceive a thin, almost invisible shadow clinging to him. It was not dramatic darkness, no hatred, no rebellion, no violent sin. Rather, it was the subtle, suffocating smoke that rises from a fire no one admits is burning. It was the smoke of self-deception. The soul's darkness, Padre Pio realized, was born not from great sin but from the absence of humility. It came from believing salvation was automatic, from imagining that God must reward him simply because he had fulfilled external duties. Finally, the man lifted his chin and declared with serene confidence, "I am ready for heaven." Padre Pio's heart ached. Gently, he asked the question that would unravel the truth. "My son, did you love God?" For the first time, the soul faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. "I followed his rules," he said. Padre Pio's voice softened even more. "But did you love him?" A long silence settled between them. The candles on the altar fluttered as though stirred by the truth pressing into the room. Padre Pio later explained that this was the moment everything became clear. The man had practiced religion without ever offering God his heart. He obeyed commandments, but never welcomed grace. He performed charitable acts, but lacked compassion. He confessed sins, but never truly repented. His faith had become an achievement, something to display rather than a relationship to live. He lived, Padre Pio said, as though salvation were a transaction, not a surrender. The soul's expression changed. He looked around the chapel, expecting perhaps to see light, angels, some sign of welcome. Instead, he saw only shadows. And then Padre Pio saw what the soul had never seen during life. Behind the man, a presence appeared. It was not demonic in the dramatic sense, no claws, no flames, no terror. It was something far worse, a cold, quiet, patient emptiness, a spirit that clung to the soul like a second skin, self-righteousness. Padre Pio said it was the most frightening presence he had ever witnessed, not because it tormented the soul, but because it comforted him. It whispered the lie that he was already holy, already safe, already beyond repentance. The man turned back to Padre Pio, his composure cracking. "I obeyed the rules," he insisted. "Why is there no light for me?" "It's classer." Padre Pio's voice trembled with sadness. "Because rules are not God," he said softly, "and you never came to him." A shiver passed through the soul. For the first time, he looked afraid not of punishment, but of truth. His false certainty was crumbling. "You believed you were saved," Padre Pio continued, "yet you never asked for mercy. You believed you were righteous, yet you never examined your heart. You performed good works, but you never allowed grace to transform you." The man shook his head violently. "I was not a sinner," but his voice betrayed him, quivering like a cracked bell. Padre Pio lifted his hand to bless him, a final effort, a desperate hope that even now, in this mystical moment, grace might penetrate the hardness around his soul. But the soul stepped back, not out of rebellion, not out of hatred, but because he could not believe he needed forgiveness. Padre Pio felt grief like a knife. "No one is harder to save," he whispered, "than the one who sees no need for salvation." The candles flickered violently, as though the room itself mourned. And thus began the most painful vision Padre Pio ever carried. The bells of San Giovanni Rotondo had long fallen silent when the friary slipped into its usual nighttime hush. The corridors, washed in a faint amber glow from lanterns left burning for safety, felt colder than usual, as if the mountain wind had crept in through unseen cracks. Outside, the olive trees swayed gently in the darkness, their branches whispering secrets older than the monastery itself. Padre Pio, exhausted from a long day of confessions, had finally retired to his small cell. The wooden room was bare, just a narrow bed, a crucifix worn smooth from years of prayer, and a small table holding his breviary. Yet even in such simplicity, grace seemed thick in the air, as though invisible hands lingered, guarding the space. He lay down, but sleep did not come easily. His body ached, especially the wounds on his hands, wrapped in fresh linen. Some days, the pain felt like a whisper. Other days, it roared like a furnace. Tonight it pulsed steadily, reminding him of the mystery he carried, one he neither sought nor fully understood. He made the sign of the cross, whispering, "Lord, if someone needs me tonight, let me hear you." He did not expect an answer so soon. It began with a soft rustling so faint he thought it might be the wind. But then came footsteps, slow and hesitant, like someone unsure of their right to approach. Padre Pio sat up, instantly alert. The friary was locked at night. No visitor should be inside. The footsteps stopped outside his door. "Come in," Padre Pio said quietly. The door swung open without a sound. A young man stood in the doorway, his face pale and grief-stricken. His clothes were simple, but something about them felt old, out of place. His eyes shimmered with an anguish that was not of this world, deep, penetrating, almost pleading. "Padre," the young man whispered, "may I speak with you?" Padre Pio nodded. "Enter, my son." "Da." The stranger stepped inside, moving as though weighed down by an invisible burden. He did not sit until Padre Pio gently motioned to the chair opposite his bed. "What is your name?" Padre Pio asked. The young man lowered his eyes. "I no longer have the right to say my name, Padre." A cold stillness filled the room. Padre Pio's heart tightened. He knew then that the visitor was not among the living. The young man's hands trembled as he spoke. "I died many years ago," he said. "I wander, searching for a prayer, a single prayer that could free me. But I have none. I was so far from God when I died, so confused, so proud." Padre Pio's gaze softened. Encounters with souls from purgatory were not new to him, yet each visitation pierced his heart anew. These were not ghosts, not specters of superstition, they were souls longing for the mercy they never sought in life. "My son," Padre Pio said gently, "tell me what you need." The young man lifted his eyes, and for a moment the anguish melted into hope. "Padre, I need one mass, just one. If you would offer it for me, God will allow me to leave this suffering." Padre Pio nodded immediately. "I will offer it tomorrow at dawn." The young man closed his eyes as though drinking in the promise like water in a desert. "Thank you, Padre. Thank you, Pine." But as he spoke, something strange began to happen. The dim room seemed to brighten not with natural light, but with a pale, trembling radiance. The young man's outline blurred, as if he were dissolving gently into the illuminated air. Before he vanished completely, he said one last thing, his voice trembling with urgency. "Padre, many souls wander like me, lost, forgotten. Pray for them. The world is growing colder, and more will be lost if hearts continue to turn away from God." Then the light faded, and the room was silent again. Padre Pio remained still, hands clasped tightly, the weight of the encounter pressing deeply into his spirit. It was not fear he felt, but sorrow for souls who died unprepared, sorrow for the world rushing toward a darkness it did not recognize. He slid from the bed to his knees. Though weary, he prayed, "Lord, may your mercy find every child who seeks the light, even in their final breath." The next morning, as the first rays of sun spilled over the mountains, the friars gathered for Mass. Padre Pio, still carrying the memory of the night, approached the altar with a tenderness that startled even himself. The chapel was crowded as it always was, but he felt only the presence of one soul. As he lifted the chalice, Padre Pio whispered under his breath, "For the young man you sent last night, Hazavro." The moment the words left his lips, he felt a rush of warmth, like a wave of grace passing through him. It was gone in an instant, but he knew what it meant. Somewhere, in the vast mystery of God's mercy, a soul had been set free. When the Mass ended, Padre Pio remained kneeling. A fellow friar approached him, concerned. "Padre, are you ill?" Padre Pio opened his eyes, shining with a quiet fire. "No, brother. I am simply reminded that purgatory is nearer to us than most imagine." The friar swallowed, unsure how to respond. Padre Pio placed a hand on his shoulder. "Pray for the forgotten souls, brother. They need us more than we know." Then quote, that night, for the first time in weeks, Padre Pio slept peacefully. No footsteps, no visitors, only a gentle silence and the faint scent of roses, a sign he often experienced after a soul had been released by God's mercy. But he also knew this was only the beginning. The young man's final warning echoed in his memory. The world is growing colder. Padre Pio sensed a storm coming, not one of wind or rain, but of spirits, choices, and the moral battles that shape eternity. And he understood something else as well. He would not face these nights alone, because where sin increases, grace multiplies. Where darkness deepens, light burns brighter. And where souls cry out from the shadows, God always sends someone who will listen, even if that someone is simply a humble friar, praying in a small stone cell on a mountain in southern Italy. Morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of the church, painting streaks of amber, gold, and crimson across the stone floor. Parishioners moved quietly, some kneeling in prayer, others lighting candles with trembling hands. The scent of incense lingered in the air, mingling with a subdued tension that Padre Pio sensed immediately. Something was unsettled, subtle, but undeniable. He had learned early in his ministry that people often spoke with their steps long before they opened their mouths, and this morning the steps of many were weary, hesitant, burdened with invisible stories. Padre Pio entered the confessional, the familiar wooden structure worn smooth from decades of penitence seeking mercy. The door creaked as he settled inside, pulling the dark curtain closed. He made the sign of the cross. "Lord, let me listen with your ears," he whispered. "Let me speak with your heart." The line outside the confessional stretched almost to the back of the church, a common sight. But today the faces bore an anxious shadow. Word had spread of Padre Pio's encounter with the soul from purgatory, though none knew the details. Still, rumors in a small Italian town traveled like wildfire. The first penitent entered, a woman clutching a rosary so tightly the beads dug into her palm. "Padre," she said in a voice strained with fear, "I keep having dreams of fire, of people crying out. Am I losing my mind?" Padre Pio closed his eyes, listening not only to her words but to her trembling spirit. "No, my daughter," he said softly. "The Lord allows certain souls to feel the suffering of others so that they may pray for them. Do not fear the dreams. Offer them for the souls who have no one to pray for them." She sobbed with relief. One by one, people entered: farmers, widows, soldiers, mothers, young men still bearing the wounds of war. They confessed with unusual urgency, as though they sensed the world shifting beneath their feet. But then came someone different. A silence preceded him, thick, unsettling, like a shadow creeping beneath a door. The man stepped into the confessional, but he did not kneel. He stood still, breathing slowly. Padre Pio felt a chill roll through the wooden walls. "Padre," the stranger said at last, "I don't believe in God. I came only because someone dragged me here." Padre Pio smiled faintly behind the screen. "Even those dragged to the cross may yet be saved, my son," the man scoffed. "I don't need saving." Padre Pio paused. The stigmata in his hands burned a deep, pulsing ache. Not pain alone, but recognition. This man was not merely skeptical. His soul was swallowed in a darkness that was not entirely his own. "My son," Padre Pio said gently, "tell me what troubles your heart." A long silence followed. Then the man whispered, almost unwillingly, "I keep hearing voices at night." Padre Pio's pulse slowed. He spoke carefully. "What do they say?" The man's breath trembled, though he tried to hide it. "They tell me I don't belong to God. They tell me I was rejected before I was even born." Padre Pio's hands tightened. He recognized the pattern clearly, an assault on the soul, subtle yet deadly, a war waged in the unseen. "And do you believe these voices?" he asked. The man swallowed. "I don't know anymore." Padre Pio leaned forward. His voice dropped to a soft but steady whisper. "My son, listen to me. Hell is a liar, always. It speaks half-truths wrapped in fear to make you forget the mercy of God." The man exhaled sharply, as if struck. Padre Pio continued, "Tell me, after these voices speak, what do you feel?" Another long pause. Then, in a trembling confession, "Hopeless, worthless, like I was made for destruction." The friar's voice grew firm. "No one is made for destruction. God creates only for love. The enemy twists what he can, but he cannot undo the intention of the Creator. Duris, annos, anno bises." The man's breathing faltered, the armor around him cracking ever so slightly. "Padre," he whispered, "I'm afraid to sleep. I'm afraid of what I might see." Padre Pio closed his eyes. He had heard stories like this, soldiers haunted by war, widows tormented by grief, children tormented by nightmares. But this case carried a different weight, a different scent, something darker. He prayed silently. Then he said, "My son, will you allow me to pray for you?" The man hesitated, then nodded. Padre Pio reached through the small opening in the confessional and placed his wounded hand over the man's trembling one. The moment their skin touched, the man gasped as though plunged into icy water. His entire body tensed. Padre Pio prayed aloud, "Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, cast out every lie spoken against this soul. Let your truth pierce the darkness around him." A deep groan rose from the man's chest, raw, primal, as if something inside him resisted the prayer. Padre Pio continued, unwavering, "Holy Spirit, restore this child to the knowledge of your love." The groan broke into sobbing, heavy, heart-wrenching sobbing. When it was over, the man collapsed to his knees at last, tears running freely. "Padre, I feel lighter." Padre Pio smiled gently. "Because the truth dispels darkness." 12 Ace. "Will the voices return?" the man asked. Padre Pio answered honestly, "Perhaps, but now you know they are liars, and a soul that knows the truth cannot be easily touched." The man left the confessional transformed, not yet whole, but no longer drowning. Hours passed. The confession line grew shorter. But Padre Pio felt something building, a pressure in the spiritual air, like a storm gathering beyond the hills. Late in the afternoon, as the final penitent left, Padre Pio remained inside the confessional, too tired to rise. Then, without warning, he heard a whisper, not through the curtain, not in the church, but inside the confessional itself. A voice soft, shaking, desperate. "Padre." Padre Pio froze. He knew that tone, that sorrow, that longing. "Padre, help us." Another soul from purgatory. But this one was different. There wasn't one voice. There were many. A chorus of suffering echoing from the unseen. "Padre, there are so many of us, forgotten, abandoned. Pray, please pray." The friar's eyes filled with tears. Never before had he heard them like this. Never in such numbers. Never with such urgency. He pressed his hands together, the stigmata throbbing like fire beneath the bandages. "Lord," he whispered, "have mercy." Tué. And in the stillness of the confessional, he sensed a revelation that chilled him to the bone. Purgatory was not silent anymore. The veil was thinning. Something was awakening. Something the world was not ready for.